The morning air was calm, almost sacred, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. The water shimmered faintly under the rising sun, untouched, pure, waiting. Then the crunch of gravel broke the silence. A silver pickup eased into the small lot beside Willow Creek Lake. Behind the wheel was a man named Derek Miles. Steady hands, thoughtful eyes, the kind of man who believed in peace more than power. He had spent the week looking forward to this morning. Fishing was his reset button. No deadlines, no meetings, no noise. Just him. His old aluminum boat polished the night before and the gentle echo of water meeting shore. It was the same lake his late father had brought him to every summer when life still felt simple. Derek smiled as he unhitched the trailer, humming softly under his breath. But peace doesn't last long where pride lives nearby. A sharp voice cut through the morning air. "You can't park that here," Derek turned surprised. A woman in her mid-50s strode toward him with the confidence of someone who'd been waiting her whole life to give an order. Nancy Carver, head of the Willow Bend Homeowners Association, wore her authority like a crown. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high on her head even though the sun hadn't fully climbed up yet. "This is private property," she said, her tone clipped and certain. "Only residents and approved guests are allowed to use the lake." Derek wiped his hands on his jeans and gave a polite nod. "Good morning to you too." She didn't return the smile. "Do you live here?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. But I've fished here plenty of times." Nancy clicked her pen like a weapon. "Then you need to move your boat now. This area is managed by the Willow Bend Fishing Club. You're not on the list." Her words were crisp, but the way she said "you're not on the list" carried more weight than policy. It was a judgment. Derek saw it in her eyes, the quick sizing up, the unspoken assumption that he didn't belong. He tried to keep his voice calm. "Didn't see a sign saying it was private." "There's one by the pavilion," she replied sharply. "You must have missed it." Derek could feel the tension rising, but he stayed steady. "I've been coming here since I was a kid. My dad taught me how to fish right on this shore." Nancy crossed her arms. "That's touching, but nostalgia doesn't make you a member. Either you move the boat or I make a call." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them thickened with quiet challenge. Then Derek asked, "You sure you want to make that call?" Nancy squinted, her lips twitching into a thin smirk. "Excuse me?" "You might want to double-check who owns this lake before you threaten to call anyone." Her laugh was short, brittle, and dismissive. "Oh, please. You can't scare me with stories. I've lived here 20 years. I know who owns it." Derek's tone stayed calm, but there was a firmness underneath. "Then you should know that I bought it 4 years ago. The entire lake. The trust is under my name, and your club's access," he gestured toward her clipboard, "depends on my approval." Her expression faltered just long enough for him to notice. A tiny crack in the armor, then she quickly composed herself. "You're bluffing." Derek smiled faintly. "Believe whatever helps you sleep." He reattached the line to his boat, unbothered. "You do what you need to do, Ms. Carver." As he backed the boat into the water, Nancy's composure started to fray. But Derek didn't argue. He let the truth carry its own weight. The moment he pushed off and drifted into the still water, he knew this wasn't over. By the time the sun had fully risen, Nancy was back, and this time, she brought company. A security officer in a windbreaker and sunglasses, posture stiff with uncertainty, sat beside her in a white golf cart. They stopped at the dock. "Mr. Miles," she called, voice echoing over the lake. "This is your final warning. You are trespassing on private property." Derek reeled in his line, turned his chair, and gave a friendly wave. "Morning again, Nancy." "I've contacted the sheriff," she announced, chin high. "You are to vacate immediately." The guard shifted uncomfortably. Derek tilted his head. "That man with you, does he have a badge or just a radio?" Nancy's jaw tightened. "You don't need to worry about that." "Well," Derek said evenly, "if you're going to accuse someone of trespassing on private land, you might want to make sure you're not the one trespassing first." The guard blinked. "Sir, are you saying you own this property?" "I'm not saying it," Derek replied. "I'm stating it." He leaned forward. "Check the county records. Look up Summit Lakes Holdings Trust, that's me. Every square foot of this lake, this dock, and that parking lot belongs to it." Nancy's lips curled. "You expect us to believe you?" "You don't have to," Derek said simply. "The truth doesn't depend on your belief." The guard hesitated. "Do you have ID?" "In my truck," Derek said. I'll show it to the deputy when they arrive. You know, the ones you called. Nancy folded her arms, furious. This lake has been part of our community for decades. You can't just take it from us. I didn't take anything, Derek said, calm but firm. I bought it. I maintain it. I pay taxes on it. The only thing I took was responsibility. For a few moments, no one spoke. The sound of rippling water filled the silence. Then Nancy turned to the guard. We'll let the sheriff handle this. You do that, Derek said. He cast another line, unbothered. I'll be right here. She stormed off, golf cart tires spitting gravel as they left. But as the sound faded, Derek sat back in his chair, eyes on the horizon. He knew what was coming. People like Nancy didn't back down quietly, and in the quiet of that lake he could already feel the storm building. By the time Derek drove home that afternoon, the sun had climbed high enough to bake the gravel under his tires. His truck rattled down the long, narrow road leading to his property, a quiet stretch of land where the sound of birds often replaced the noise of neighbors. The weight of the morning still lingered, but it wasn't anger that filled him. It was something deeper, a familiar ache that came from being judged before a word left his mouth. He parked beside his modest white house, paint slightly weathered, the porch half in shade. A brown dog with a graying muzzle, Buddy, wagged his tail from the steps, greeting him with a bark that made Derek smile for the first time that day. Hey, old man, he said softly, rubbing Buddy's head. You wouldn't believe the nonsense I ran into today. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. He hung his keys by the door and paused by a framed photo on the wall. His father stood beside a younger Derek, both holding fishing rods and grinning at the camera. The lake behind them sparkled in the sunlight. His father's words echoed in his mind. Respect isn't about what you say. It's about how you show up when someone doubts you. Derek sat at the kitchen table and exhaled slowly. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted peace. But that woman, Nancy Carver, had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Not because she told him to move his boat, but because of the way she said it. The tone, the certainty that he didn't belong there. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a blue folder labeled Willow Creek Lake. Ownership documents. Inside were property deeds, tax receipts, maintenance logs, all filed under Summit Lakes Holdings Trust with his name printed clearly on the trustee line. He ran his hand over the pages. Every document was proof that what he said at the lake wasn't a bluff. Flipping through, Derek found the agreement between the HOA and the trust, an old deal granting temporary access for community use. It was supposed to be renewed annually. He checked the dates. The last renewal was nearly a year and a half ago. They hadn't even bothered to file an extension. He let out a quiet laugh. Guess they thought ownership came free. He took a sip of iced tea and stared at the folder. He didn't want to start a feud, but ignoring this would mean letting them walk all over what his father built. That evening, Derek made a call to James Benton, a longtime family friend, and his legal advisor. James, it's Derek. Sorry to bother you this late. No bother at all, Derek. What's going on? I need you to pull up the old access agreement between my trust and the Willow Bend HOA. I think they've been using the lake without renewal. James whistled softly through the phone. You mean they're trespassing? Technically, yes, but I'm not looking to fight. I just need everything straight. Understood. I'll check the records in the morning. When the call ended, Derek leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't sure what the next few days would bring, but he knew one thing. Nancy Carver had mistaken his calm for weakness. The next morning, he drove into town to the county recorder's office. The clerk behind the counter looked up, polite but curious. How can I help you? Need a copy of the deed for parcel number 1187C, Willow Creek Lake, Derek said. The clerk typed quickly, then turned the monitor toward him. His name appeared clearly on the document, along with the property lines. The entire lake, the surrounding paths, even the boat dock, it was all part of his trust. Everything looks valid, the clerk said. You're the sole trustee listed, Derek nodded slowly. Good, that's what I needed. When he left the office, the morning air felt lighter. For the first time in days, he wasn't just certain, he was ready. That evening, he sat at his desk with a blank document on his laptop and began to type. Each word came steady and clear. There was no anger, no insults, just facts. He wrote to the Willow Bend Homeowners Association. formally notifying them that their right to use the lake had expired and that public access was suspended until a new agreement could be reviewed. He signed it neatly, attached copies of the deeds and the expired contract, then printed the letter. By the time he sealed it in an envelope, the sky outside had darkened into soft blue. The next morning, he drove to the HOA office, a beige, forgettable building tucked behind the gated neighborhood's entrance. He walked inside, handed the envelope to the receptionist, and said calmly, "Make sure this reaches Nancy Carver." The woman blinked, confused by his tone. "Do you want a receipt, sir?" "No," Derek said. "Just make sure she gets it." Later that evening, his phone buzzed. The caller ID read unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Miles?" a man's voice asked. "This is Rick Coleman, acting president of the Willow Bend HOA. We received your letter today. I wanted to speak directly before things get blown out of proportion." "There's no proportion to blow," Derek replied evenly. "The agreement expired." "I'm just setting boundaries," Rick sighed. "Look, maybe we can meet halfway. The residents have been using that lake for decades. Cutting off access suddenly could cause an uproar." "I'm not cutting it off," Derek said. "I'm pausing it. There's a difference. And after the way your board member handled herself last weekend, maybe it's time for everyone to think about respect before rights." A pause. "Would you at least be open to a meeting?" "Not until people stop acting like they own what they don't," he ended the call. The conversation left him uneasy but resolved. He walked outside to the porch where the sky blazed orange with the setting sun. Buddy lay curled by his feet, breathing softly. Derek took a long breath, watching the lake glimmer faintly in the distance. Something told him the letter was just the beginning, the calm before the storm. The next few days would prove him right. By Wednesday morning, Derek could feel the shift. Not just in the air, but in the way people looked at him. It started small. A few stares at the grocery store, whispers near the post office. Folks who used to smile and wave now avoided his eyes. When he opened his mailbox, he found the first note. No name, no return address. "You didn't have to go this far." He read it once, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. The words didn't sting, but the cowardice did. At the hardware store that afternoon, as Derek was comparing bolts, a man in work boots and a worn cap approached. "You're Derek Miles, right?" "Depends who's asking," Derek said lightly. The man smiled. "Name's Harold Wills, been here 25 years. Heard what went down at the lake." Derek gave a slow nod. "Yeah, guess news travels fast." Harold chuckled. "Nancy's been running that HOA like a kingdom. Told me once my porch chairs were non-compliant." He laughed, shaking his head. "Non-compliant. They're just chairs." That earned a real smile from Derek. "I'll take that as solidarity." "Not everyone's against you," Harold said, lowering his voice. "Some of us think she's needed humbling for a while." Derek thanked him and left with a small sense of relief. Not all voices in the neighborhood were against him, just the loudest ones. But by the next day, the tone changed again. Flyers appeared in mailboxes and on bulletin boards, each one printed with the same bold headline: "Local man revokes community lake access, power move or revenge." The text accused Derek of exploiting his ownership to punish residents. It painted him as a selfish outsider dismantling a beloved tradition. He could almost hear Nancy's voice in every sentence, polite enough to sound official, sharp enough to cut. Derek folded the flyer, shoved it into his pocket, and took Buddy for a walk. The gravel path to the lake was quiet. He passed a couple of neighbors near the shore. They didn't say a word, only watched him with wary eyes. He stood at the dock, the same place where the argument had started. The water glimmered, calm and indifferent. "You'd think a little lake could keep the peace," he murmured to himself. That night the phone rang again. This time the caller introduced herself gently. "Mr. Miles? This is Claire Jennings. I'm new on the HOA board. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how things unfolded." Derek's tone softened. "You weren't there." "No need to apologize for someone else's behavior." "I know," Claire said, "but I heard what happened, and honestly, not everyone supports how Nancy's handled things. Some of us want to fix it." "There's nothing to fix," Derek replied. "There's only respect to learn." A pause hung between them. "There's talk of a board meeting," Claire said finally. "Some members want to overturn your decision. Others think we should start over properly. If it happens, I'd like you to attend. Let them hear your side." He thought about it, staring at the lake through his window. "We'll see." But Claire was right. The meeting was inevitable. By Friday morning, the HOA office was buzzing like a nest kicked open. Derek's letter had spread through every street, every inbox, every gossip circle. The fishing club was furious, the older residents confused, and the younger ones curious. Everyone had an opinion. Inside the office, Nancy Carver stood at the head of the table, her expression sharp enough to draw blood. Rick Coleman sat beside her, exhaustion etched across his face. "We've all seen the letter," he began, "and whether we like it or not, Derek's within his rights. So we just let him close the lake?" One member barked. "We built this community around that water." Nancy's tone snapped like a whip. "He's using his title to prove a point. That's not leadership, that's spite." Claire, sitting near the end of the table, spoke calmly. "He's not proving a point. He's reminding us of one, and that respect has to go both ways." Nancy turned on her. "You taking his side now?" "I'm taking the side of facts," Claire replied. "We never renewed the contract." "That's on us." The room fell quiet for a moment. Then Rick sighed. "Let's just agree this could have been avoided." Meanwhile, Derek was back at the lake, clipboard in hand. He wasn't there to gloat. He was documenting the broken benches, torn netting, beer cans scattered along the edge, maintenance that the HOA had ignored for years. As he took notes, Harold's old pickup pulled up behind him. "You sure you want to stir this hornet's nest?" Harold asked. Derek didn't look up. "Didn't stir anything. Just stopped letting people walk through my yard without asking." That evening, an official notice went out from the HOA, effective immediately. All community access to Willow Creek Lake is suspended pending review and renegotiation with Summit Lakes Holdings Trust. Unauthorized use will be treated as trespassing. Within hours, the neighborhood erupted. Emails flew, group chats exploded. Backyard whispers turned into shouting matches. Some blamed Nancy, some blamed Derek. Others didn't know who to believe. A few even claimed he planned to sell the land to a developer. A rumor so wild it made Derek laugh out loud when he heard it. But he wasn't laughing long. The tension was real now, and he knew it would all come to a head soon. That night, Claire showed up at his porch. She stood a respectful distance away, holding a small folder. "I wanted to see if you'd speak at the board meeting next week," she said. "Why?" Derek asked. "Because they only know Nancy's version of you," she said quietly. "And that's not the truth." He studied her for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come." As she left, the night settled heavy and still. The air was thick with the feeling of something waiting to happen. And Derek could feel it too, that unspoken sense that this wasn't just about a lake anymore. It was about a man standing his ground in a world that still couldn't stand to see him own it. The evening of the meeting came faster than Derek expected. By the time he pulled into the parking lot beside the Willow Bend Community Center, the place was already packed. Cars lined both sides of the narrow road. Porch lights glowed all the way down the cul-de-sac. Through the open doors, Derek could hear the hum of voices. Low, restless, charged. People who never cared about the lake before were suddenly experts on property law and community rights. He walked inside, wearing his usual jeans and a clean button-down. He didn't carry notes, didn't need to. Truth didn't require a script. The room went quiet for a moment when he stepped in. Then came the whispers. "That's him. The guy who shut down the lake. He's the one." Claire waved him over to a seat near the front. She looked nervous but resolute. Nancy sat dead center at the long table, arms folded tight, jaw clenched. She didn't acknowledge him, but her glare did all the talking. Rick Coleman, trying to hold the peace, tapped the microphone. "Let's bring the meeting to order. Tonight's agenda is to discuss lake access and review the recent correspondence from Mr. Derek Miles." He looked over at Derek. "Mr. Miles has agreed to speak. Let's give him the courtesy of listening." Derek rose slowly. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint whir of the ceiling fans. He looked around, meeting eyes one by one. "My father used to bring me to that lake when I was a kid," he began, "long before this neighborhood existed. Back then, it wasn't about property lines or regulations. It was about learning patience, about being still enough to understand what nature was saying." The murmurs quieted. A few people leaned forward. "When I bought that land 4 years ago, I didn't fence it off or post warnings. I let the community keep using it because I believed in the same idea my father did, that people can share something beautiful as long as they respect it. But lately," he said, his tone tightening, "I've seen more taking than respecting. He paused to let that sink in. The agreement between my trust and your HOA expired over a year ago. No one renewed it. No one maintained the space, and when I showed up to fish on my own property, I was treated like a criminal. That's not misunderstanding. That's arrogance. From the back, someone muttered, "She didn't know." Derek turned his gaze toward the voice. She didn't ask. Silence again. This isn't about revenge or control, he continued. It's about accountability. I've paid every tax, repaired every dock plank, cleaned every pile of trash left behind. I've done my part. And all I asked for in return was a little respect. He sat down. The air was thick with tension. Nancy stood. If you wanted respect, Mr. Miles, you could have come to us before revoking access. You didn't have to punish the entire community for one bad interaction. Derek met her stare. You came to me first, clipboard in hand, ready to call the police. Don't rewrite the order of things. A few heads turned toward Nancy. Her cheeks reddened. Rick cleared his throat. Let's keep this civil. We'll open the floor to discussion. Hands shot up. An older man in a fishing vest spoke first. I've fished that lake for 20 years. My kids learned there. It's part of this neighborhood's life. You can't just close it off. Derek nodded. Then maybe the neighborhood should have cared enough to follow the agreement that kept it open. A woman near the door raised her hand next. If the HOA takes responsibility for maintenance and renews properly, would you reconsider? Derek thought for a long moment before answering. I'll consider it, but not until I know people understand that ownership isn't the same as entitlement. No one interrupted him after that. The meeting stretched for another hour, voices rising, fading, circling around the same truth. Derek didn't back down, and for the first time, some of them began to see the difference between defiance and dignity. When it was over, he walked out into the cool night air. Claire followed. You handled that better than I expected, she said quietly. Derek smiled faintly. I'm not trying to win. I just want them to think. And they did. Over the next few days, the neighborhood grew oddly calm. No more flyers, no angry emails, no shouting from golf carts. The tension that had once filled the air began to settle. One morning, Derek noticed something unusual. The same people who had once glared at him now gave small nods from a distance. It wasn't warmth yet, but it was acknowledgement. Nancy Carver, however, stayed silent. Rumor had it she'd stepped down from her HOA position to focus on family matters. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew why. The following weekend, Derek loaded a small toolbox into his truck and headed back to the lake. The benches were broken, the railings loose, the trail scattered with debris. Buddy trotted beside him, tail wagging. He wasn't fixing it for the community. He was fixing it for himself and for his father's memory. Halfway through tightening a loose board, footsteps crunched behind him. Need a hand? He turned. Claire stood there in jeans and sneakers, hair tied back, a drill hanging from her hand. You know how to use that thing? He asked with a smirk. I've fixed more HOA furniture than I care to admit, she said, smiling. He handed her a plank. Then you're overqualified. They worked side by side in comfortable silence. The sound of nails and soft wind filled the air. For the first time in weeks, Derek felt the quiet peace that had drawn him to the lake in the first place. As the sun dipped lower, Claire spoke again. There are people who want to make things right. We're drafting a new agreement, real maintenance schedules, clear rules, actual accountability. No more threats and clipboards? Derek asked. She grinned. No more, he nodded. I'll read it when it's ready. By sunset, the dock looked better than it had in years. The wood gleamed with fresh sealant. The benches sat firm and even, and the trash along the shore was gone. As he packed his tools, another familiar voice called from behind. Brought some help, Harold said, stepping out of his truck with his teenage grandson. The boy carried a rake and a trash bag. Figured we'd clean the trail. Can't let you do all the work. Derek smiled and handed the boy a pair of gloves. Appreciate it. That evening, the lake reflected gold from the last sliver of daylight. It was quiet again, peaceful, whole. And for the first time since that first confrontation, Derek felt something shift, not just around him, but inside the people who shared the space. Respect wasn't forced. It was finally growing. And though the fight had started with pride and anger, it was ending with something stronger. Understanding. Part 5 would carry that quiet transformation to its final test. A week later, Dawn broke over Willow Creek Lake in soft gold and silver streaks. Mist clung to the surface like a veil, and the only sound was the quiet lap of water against the dock Derek had rebuilt with his own hands. He stood there alone, boots resting on the newly sanded boards, Buddy sitting at his heel. He didn't bring his fishing rod that morning. He didn't need it. This wasn't about catching fish anymore. It was about remembering why he'd fought in the first place. The stillness, the air, the legacy. It was all a piece of something his father had taught him long ago. If you love something, take care of it even when others don't understand why. Under his arm, Derek carried a folder, the finalized lake access agreement, the revised version Claire and the new board had worked on. He had read every line of it the night before. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. It protected the land, set boundaries, and required anyone who used the lake to take responsibility for keeping it whole. He drove to the community clubhouse where the board waited. The atmosphere this time was different. No shouting, no whispers, just quiet respect. Claire greeted him with a warm nod. "Everything's ready," she said. He glanced around. A few familiar faces met his gaze. Neighbors who once doubted him, now silent and attentive. Even Rick Coleman, once weary and hesitant, looked genuinely grateful. Derek signed the document with a steady hand. The sound of the pen on paper echoed in the room. When he finished, Claire leaned closer. "We'll hold up our end," she said. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "I'll hold you to that." As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a small group of teenagers standing near the bulletin board. They froze when they saw him, whispering among themselves. One of them, a tall boy wearing a fishing hat too big for his head, took a hesitant step forward. "Mr. Miles," he said. Derek paused. "Yeah? My dad said you fixed the dock. He wanted me to thank you." Derek studied the boy for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Just take care of it, all right?" The boy grinned. "We will. Promise." Outside, the sun had climbed higher, cutting through the last of the mist. Derek walked to his truck, feeling a quiet weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he felt no tension in his chest, only peace. The road home wound along the edge of the lake. He slowed as he passed the water, watching the ripples sparkle in the morning light. Families would return soon, mothers watching their kids skip stones, older men casting lines from the shore, quiet conversations carried on the breeze. But it would be different this time. They would know whose lake they stood beside. They would remember what it took to keep it. That afternoon, Derek and Buddy walked the trail one last time before heading home. The path was clear, the benches solid, the dock gleaming under the sun. As they reached the end, Derek stopped and looked out over the water. He thought of his father again, the man who had taught him to be patient, who told him that silence could be the loudest kind of strength. Derek smiled softly. He understood it now. Standing your ground wasn't about shouting louder than the other person. It was about refusing to be moved when you know you're right. And in that still moment, with the world finally quiet around him, he realized he hadn't just reclaimed his father's lake. He'd reclaimed something greater, his peace, his dignity, and the truth that real respect isn't demanded. It's earned plank by plank, choice by choice. The sun glimmered on the surface as if the lake itself nodded back in agreement. Derek took a deep breath, let the wind fill his lungs, and whispered, "We're home, Dad." Buddy barked once in reply, tail wagging, the sound echoing across the calm water. Somewhere beyond the trees, the faint sound of hammers echoed, neighbors building new benches for the lakeside park. A small start, but a good one. And as Derek turned to walk back up the trail, he knew that sometimes change doesn't come from shouting or fighting. It comes when people finally listen to the quietest voice in the room, the one that never needed to raise itself to be heard. For Derek Miles, peace had never been about winning. It had always been about standing tall, staying calm, and letting truth do what noise never could. And that's how one man's patience turned a fight for control into a lesson about grace.